Hey everybody, this is a piece titled The Mysterious Bruno R. By James M. Fenwick. This is from The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, edited by Matgamna. Here we go. The mysterious Bruno R. is one of the many persons who are remembered today only because their ideas were attacked by Leon Trotsky. The conceptions developed by Bruno R. in his book, The Bureaucratization of the World, were first introduced to the Marxist public in the United States by Trotsky in 1939 during the great polemic on the Russian question between himself and the minority of the Socialist Workers' Party, which subsequently became the Workers' Party. The book itself was unknown. Who then was Bruno R.? What were Bruno R.'s ideas? What relation do Bruno R.'s ideas bear to the theory of bureaucratic collectivism as advanced by the Workers' Party? It has been assumed by some comrades both here and abroad that Trotsky's attack on Bruno R.'s theory of bureaucratic collectivism was in fact directed against the Workers' Party's views. This is an error in chronology. Actually, the very first draft of what was to become the Workers' Party position did not appear until December 1940, i.e. after Trotsky's death. In the 1939 dispute, Trotsky tried to use Rizzi's book as a stalking horse. What the hell does that mean? If you describe the internet says, not Wikipedia, the internet says, if you describe something as a stalking horse, you mean that it is being used to obtain a temporary advantage so that someone can get what they really want. Alright, so back to the text. In the 1939 dispute, Trotsky tried to use Rizzi's book as a stalking horse in his opening gambit when he thought that the axis of the discussion was going to turn on the theory of the Russian state. However, the discussion which ensued revolved around the political programmatic question of defense of Russia in the war. Rizzi therefore disappeared from view. He is not even mentioned in the last two-thirds of Trotsky's In Defense of Marxism, for example. Bruno Rizzi, Trotsky informs us, was an Italian who at one time belonged to the Fourth International. Because of the ease with which he was able to get around his lack of Italian revolutionary, quote, references and his heterodox political views, he was treated with caution by comrades with whom he came in contact. Of his subsequent fate, nothing is known. The evolution of his political ideas is related by Rizzi in his book. He first began to re-examine the Russian question in 1936 when he published Whither the USSR in Italian. The book was confiscated by the fascist government, which, says Rizzi, quote, certainly did not understand the real objective of our work, end quote. This curious statement will become clear when we elaborate upon Rizzi's views. Rizzi returned to the question in Is This the Twilight of Civilization? Written, quote, to combat opportunism and to lead workers to the Fourth International, end quote. In this work, he, quote, dwelt on the question of the new ruling class in the USSR, end quote. Rizzi relates, quote, at London in November 1938, we attempted to pose the question of the nature of the Soviet state in the English section of the Fourth International. Unfortunately, the comrades, totalitarians also, had already had, quote, plenty of discussions and were not in agreement with Trotsky. We succeeded in being heard, even in a limited way, only by the East London comrades. They took us for a petty bourgeois, and obstructionism closed the development of the discussion, end quote. The Bureaucratization of the World was conceived and written between the end of 1938 and the middle of May 1939. He believes that a new type of state, which he calls bureaucratic collectivist, has emerged in Russia. This state, which is neither proletarian nor capitalist, is ruled by the bureaucracy, which has assumed a class character. As far as these two sentences go, they coincide with our own views. Beginning from such an insight into the nature of the Russian phenomenon, however, one can proceed in various directions, and from this point, the Workers' Party parts company with the views of Rizzi. We shall see how far afield he goes in his own direction. For Rizzi, bureaucratic collectivism is historically progressive. Bureaucratic collectivism is historically progressive. This indeed is the prime dividing line. For Rizzi, it is a world phenomenon intermediary between capitalism and socialism, partially achieved in Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy and existing in embryonic form in the New Deal in the United States. I guess I should have said this before, but this is abridged, and also it's from 1948. This new society, whose historic function is to raise the level of world production through the cooperation of several large autarchies, has been made mandatory by the bankruptcy of the working class. The chief task of the working class of England, France, and the United States is therefore to put pressure on their governments to relinquish living space and raw materials to Germany and Italy, which would permit the dictatorships to relax and world production to rise. With this bird's-eye view of Rizzi's conceptions on Russia, we can proceed to a more detailed examination of his ideas. The book opens with a synoptic view of the rise and decline of the Russian Revolution. Quote, "What is the USSR today?" End quote. Rizzi asks. Quote, "Its economy is not capitalist, nor is it based on private property, but it is based upon the collective ownership of the means of production." End quote. Exploitation takes place through the extraction of surplus value. The cause of this condition lies in the fact that, quote, "The country was basically constituted of manual laborers and of illiterates. Its industry was greatly inferior to the necessities of a vanguard economy." End quote. Behind this lies the failure of the world revolution. A new class, neither bourgeois nor proletarian, has appeared on the horizon. This class is fully formed in Russia, and, quote, "It is also visible in Italy as well as in Germany. The first indications, ... are apparent everywhere, even in the countries of the great democracies." End quote. The purges which took place following the assassination of Kirov were, quote, "only the civil war necessary for the new class to solidify its power. It is not a question of this being a sign of weakness, but of its being a demonstration of the strength of this class." End quote. Rizzi then takes up some of the arguments advanced against his thesis, in particular those used by Trotsky in 1938 in his article, "Neither a Workers' nor a Bourgeois State," which is on this channel. Quote, "Can the nature of a state always be judged?" End quote, asks Rizzi. Quote, without taking into account its political forms." End quote. He replies, quote, "It is a question of seeing to what end the expropriated and nationalized property in Russia is safeguarded from imperialism, ... End quote. If, quote, a proletarian state with a bourgeois economy has existed," end quote, as was the case immediately after the revolution, quote, "could not a non-proletarian state with a nationalized economy also exist?" End quote. Why should the new class attempt to denationalize property? Quote, "For if the nationalized property and planned economy remain, it is because both are in consonance with the regime which holds power." End quote. Even bourgeois states tend more and more to plan and to nationalize property. We are confronted with a class. An exploiting class exists in Russia, having in its hands the means of production and acting as its owner. If, quote, property is nationalized in a non-proletarian regime, it also loses its potential character of socialist property. It remains only class property." End quote. The author next takes up the boogie of capitalist restorationist trends which haunt the Fourth Internationalist thinking. He argues that historically progressive organizations, which increase the volume of production, do not go backward. Quote, "Did feudalism ever have the intention to go back to slavery?" End quote. Even if Russia were invaded by anti-common turned pact forces, there would be no reason for the destruction of a, quote, "economic system which is in the process of construction precisely in their own countries, ... End quote. Why think of the return of the bourgeoisie? Quote, if a new class is formed, it is because, historically or accidentally, it has a role to play in the historic ascent of humanity, ... is charged with organizing production on the basis of collective property and planning the economy within the state framework. While for socialism there will remain only the problem of international, quote, nationalization and the socialist distribution of products." End quote. Rizzi. Thus far, Rizzi, as we have indicated, our common starting point is that Russia is neither a worker state, however degenerated, nor a capitalist state, but rather a state ruled by a new class which is extensive, entrenched, and showing no serious tendency toward capitalist restoration. We likewise label this, quote, bureaucratic collectivism, end quote. It must be admitted that Rizzi develops this part of his thesis with not inconsiderable skill and originality. What distinguishes Rizzi's views, however, is his acceptance of bureaucratic collectivist Russia as a progressive phenomenon. his acceptance of bureaucratic collectivist Russia as a progressive phenomenon. This idea that nationalization of the means of production is, in and of itself, progressive, is the widespread fallacy of our day. A significant rise in the level of production over previously existing levels, the criterion for judging the progressive character of a given set of property relations, must, in the period of declining capitalism, be decided on a world basis. Seen from this point of view, the expression, quote, politics is concentrated economics, end quote, takes on real meaning. The effect of Stalinist politics in the past 25 years has been to hold back the establishment of international socialism, a superior mode of production, to facilitate the outbreak of World War II, which has seriously lowered even world capitalist production, and to make World War III virtually inevitable, which, given the present constellation of forces, means the victory of U.S. imperialism and, consequently, neo-barbarism. Only if socialism intervenes can the war be resolved on a progressive basis. From our vantage point, we can see the concrete outcome of what, to many, nearly a generation ago, seemed a theoretical quibble, the theory of, quote, socialism in one country, end quote, i.e. Stalinist nationalism. Actually, despite the limited resemblance between the Russian position of Bruno and that of the Workers' Party, in estimating Russia's historic role, Ricci is much closer to the position of Trotsky in the Socialist Workers' Party, for whom also the nationalized means of production form the decisive criterion of historical progressiveness, than he is to us. A lot of that sentence was in italics, so I'm going to repeat it. Actually, despite the limited resemblance between the Russian position of Bruno Ricci and that of the Workers' Party, in estimating Russia's historic role, he is much closer to the position of Trotsky in the Socialist Workers' Party, for whom also the nationalized means of production form the decisive criterion of historical progressiveness, than he is to us. Ricci, quote, our conclusion is that, in Italy as well as in Germany, capitalist society is being destroyed day by day, while the corresponding crystallization of a new society replaces it, with economic characteristics identical with Soviet characteristics, even if they are still partial, end quote. This does not prevent Ricci from speaking elsewhere as if his bureaucratic collectivism were a finished formation in these and other states. He says, for instance, quote, nevertheless, while the work of Stalin, Mussolini, or Hitler is everywhere described as socialism or capitalism, it is a question only of bureaucratic collectivism, end quote. Unlike Ricci, we cannot consider bureaucratic collectivism a world phenomenon intermediary between capitalism and socialism. We concur with Trotsky that state intervention in the fascist countries was primarily to coordinate the interests of the capitalists, and mainly for war purposes. Certainly to date, bureaucratic collectivism bears the label, quote, made in Russia, end quote. Our author moves on to the plane of historic generalization. Russia is the archetype of the new autarkic bureaucratic collectivist state. It needs neither, quote, territory nor raw materials, but only to work tranquilly and intensely, exploiting the natural riches found in its domain, end quote. Japan is following the same course. If Germany and Italy are threatening to overrun the world, it is because they lack living space and raw materials. Small states are being engulfed, quote. But if world peace and the increasing development of production are desired, a peaceful means must be found to give living space and the necessary raw materials for the building up of the German and Italian autarchies, end quote. The new ruling class must not seek to amass individual riches, but be satisfied with good salaries while seeking an absolute increase in production. Quote, its historic function will end when it reveals itself incapable of pursuing this end, end quote. Quote, nationalization, statification of the major means of production, economic planning, and production for non-individualistically speculative ends represent the trump cards of bureaucratic collectivism. In a political climate of reciprocal confidence among the autarchies, found on sure economic bases, all possibilities for increasing production are offered to the new ruling class. From a historic point of view, this class has the task of increasing the total world production in an organized manner, ... end quote. This bureaucratic state is historically necessary, but the, quote, last ruling class in history is so near to the classless society that it denies its class and ownership characteristics, end quote. Ricci agrees that the working class must have the right to strike, and the unions must be free of state control. They will serve as instruments of social control and criticism. State control of the unions in totalitarian countries must be relinquished, ... This serves to remind one that Ricci is trying to think like a socialist. The first task of the working class, then, says Ricci, is to secure a redivision of the living space and raw materials of the world, To achieve socialism, the world must first be rationally industrialized. This new cycle between capitalism and socialism is historically necessary. The workers of France, England, and the United States must, quote, make themselves master of their state and impose at least a workers' and technicians' bureaucracy, end quote, but one which, quote, will always permit proletarian control of the basic bodies, end quote. The seven autarchies could then arrive at a working agreement with each other. This progressive step is being threatened by world capitalism, which is opposing the fascist movement. The real enemies are not Hitler and Mussolini, who have, after all, quote, set out with the German and Italian workers on the new social road to the new world, end quote. Quote, all feelings of bitterness or of hate, end quote, in regard to Stalin, Hitler, and Mussolini must disappear. Quote, they too will begin to pardon and to preach the law of love, which is the great law of life, as well as social collaboration, end quote. Blinded by party passion, we have failed to understand and to honor the fascist fallen. The job of the French, English, and U.S. working class is to force their capitalists to relinquish living space and raw materials to Germany and Italy. These latter countries would then reintroduce democratic regimes. Workers and the new rulers could then rationalize production. Bankers would be pensioned off. Rizzi concluded this frenzied rapture, quote, Mussolini and Hitler extend their hand to Lenin, end quote. The Hitler-Stalin Pact is predicted, quote, the workers will never be a ruling class. They will only have the supreme honor of, quote, ruling a classless society, end quote. Quote, the Russian experience shows us that the dictatorship of the proletariat changes into a new ruling class, that of the bureaucrats, while the proletarians are transformed into, quote, while proletarians are transformed into citizen workers. While proletarians are transformed into citizen workers, end quote. Quote, the fascists have committed the theoretical error of wishing to collaborate with the bourgeoisie, whereas they should liquidate the bourgeoisie and have already killed it, end quote. When, quote, the new class is provided for its material, intellectual, and moral needs, it will obviously take pleasure in continually elevating the working class materially, intellectually, and morally, end quote. This section contains the essence of Rizzi's program, a, quote, socialist rationale for fascism. I'm going to repeat that. This section contains the essence of Rizzi's program, a, quote, socialist rationale for fascism. Next in Rizzi's film of free association is a short subject. I say free association. I don't like how it's being used here, but I feel like I say it. Free association. Next in Rizzi's film of free association is a short subject titled The Jewish Question. Quote, all the racial theories of Rosenberg, Hitler, Italian racists, etc. have not been able to resist the slightest scientific attack. Questions of blood, of origin, etc. are, in our modest opinion, only empty words, end quote. Nevertheless, it must be said that the Jews are the, quote, most jealous racist nation in the world, and they have even claimed to be more intelligent than the others, end quote. In a big majority of cases, Jews have been capitalist types. The struggle against capitalism must therefore be strongly identified with the struggle against the Jews. A mass campaign against the Jews must be initiated. Quote, Hitler is right and we are wrong, end quote. But this should not be understood as advocacy of pogroms. Workers should not fall into the trap of treating all Jews alike. Jewish workers must be taken in marriage in order to regenerate them more rapidly and to eradicate them from the face of the earth. Exclamation point. Quote, we respect and honor Marx and Trotsky and a few others of our obscure friends of the Jewish race. Certain isolated and very beautiful flowers can grow in dung heaps, but as a whole the Jewish people have become a capitalist dung heap. Where am I? Sorry, I had to copy that down. It is clear that what vile lengths of anti-Semitism Rizzi has led by his fatal acceptance of the, quote, progressiveness of Stalinist nationalization and fascist, quote, statism. Of the degeneracy of his thinking is enough to remark, as did Dean Meeks of Grant's Tomb, quote, it's a tour de force, gentlemen. You can alter it in any way without improving its proportions. End quote. The fuck is Dean Meeks? I don't know. I don't see anything on the internet. Where am I? Rizzi concludes with, quote, an appeal to mankind, unquote. He asks the bourgeoisie to repent, for they must know that a collapse is coming if they do not grant, quote, living space, end quote, and raw materials to Italy, Germany, and Japan. If this is done, the dictators will relax their regimes, quote. We do not believe that in the bottom of their hearts and as men, Stalin, Hitler, and Mussolini are happy with their regimes, ... The new world which we desire will liberate even these great prisoners, ... End quote. And so, as all good films should, it is on this note of love that we come to the end of the film, of meditations of an isolated man who tried to think like a socialist under fascism, unsuccessfully. The end. Thanks for listening.